Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar. The focus of today's webinar is Beyond COP26, the Governance of Climate Change. We've got a lot of people on the call on the webinar this morning, so please, if you have any questions or comments at any stage, do use the Q&A panel and we will do our level best to be able to respond to those for you. By way of Sorry, I believe I muted myself inadvertently then, I do apologise. Just by way of introduction, I'm Steve Barker, that's me on the left-hand side of the screen. Both Linda and I are here from Better Governor. Better Governor is an online platform for governance, and we spend a lot of our time actually preparing and delivering webinars on a whole host of different subjects, and we're delighted once again to be working with Governors for Schools this morning. As I say, I'm joined by Linda. Linda's on the other end of the line. Morning, Linda.
Good morning.
And together we're going to hopefully guide you through this session this morning, but please make it as interactive as you possibly can by putting your questions and comments on the Q&A panel. What we're going to try and cover in the session this morning by way of our aims is first and foremost just to think about the contribution as governors and trustees in our schools we can make in terms of ensuring that our pupils are engaged in that post-COP debate. And I think it's important, Linda and I were talking about this earlier this morning, that we are not here making a clarion call to everybody to jump to action now. We're very aware there's a lot going on in our schools at the moment. We know that teacher workload is a huge issue and we're not wishing to add to that, but this is just hopefully the beginning of the debate that says, how can our schools continue their engagement, because many will already be engaged in the process, and what would be the oversight of governance in that process. So along our journey this morning, we're actually going to also consider how children and young people can actually get involved if they're not already. And of course, above all else, what we want to do is think about what does good practice look like in our schools at the moment, both within the curriculum and beyond that. And of course, the undertone with all of this, or the undercurrent, I should say, with all of this is, what does our strategic oversight as governors look like? So going to kick off actually thinking that, well, actually, clearly this is something that children and young people do care about. Some have a slightly higher profile than others in this ongoing campaign or cause at the moment. There's no doubt about that. But we do know that certainly the last couple of years in the run-up to COP26 has actually fired the imagination and stirred some passions of quite a lot of children and young people, not just in our society, but across the whole wide world. So we do know it's something that our children and other children and young people across the world do actually care about, and care about quite passionately. And that does actually lead us as governors, I think, to think about what is it that we should be doing to ensure that this is done in a responsible way, it's done in an age-appropriate way, and that there is some ongoing, meaningful and honest debate that can actually be had here. The media have, of course, participated in part of this debate. I'm not going to comment particularly on any of these articles that I've actually just made a little montage of on this page here, but I think most people will agree that the media coverage of COP26, whilst it was actually going on, was fairly extensive. That included an awful lot of children and young people's voices actually being heard. And there is a little bit of a call to action here, although I think a lot of people in making those calls to action have possibly overlooked the fact that there are lots of schools doing lots of positive things already, and perhaps have been for many, many years here.
I think just to add there, Steve, that many of us in our governance have thought about the way in which our schools or academies are improving our listening to pupils. How do we allow them to have a voice that is an important voice and potentially has the opportunity to lead to change? So again, I think we need to see that again through that governance and education lens. Are we doing enough? Is there opportunities to have their voice heard? Because of course, I think a lot of young people have believed, rightly or wrongly, that they're not being listened to.
I think you're absolutely right, Linda. And in many ways, our this next slide is actually thinking about, well, there is something that's going on at the moment. Whether that is about listening to children and young people's voice, I'm not sure, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. But certainly in terms of, I think there is an aspect of statutory compliance here. I mean, certainly there is with the national curriculum, but there is an assumption that our schools are already engaged at some level. And I say that quite guardedly, because we'll explain the reasons why in just a few moments. But the national curriculum does have some guidance. Many feel it's not enough, but the national curriculum has some guidance. And of course, all of our schools, even if we're in academy trusts, and academies are notionally exempt from the national curriculum, although most of them, of course, do choose to follow it. So the national curriculum does have content that is relevant here, but of course the overarching principle of education in every single one of our schools, whether we're maintained schools or academies, is our goal should be about preparing children and young people for the next stage of their learning or the next stage of their life, whatever that happens to be. And a lot of talk within education now, particularly in Ofsted quarters, of course, we talk about children being school ready, we talk about them being Key Stage 2 ready, secondary ready, etc. That's what we're talking about here. Ready doesn't just mean ready from an academic perspective, it means ready from a social, emotional well-being perspective, but it also means ready to be able to participate in the world. And as Linda said, part of that idea that you have a voice that can be listened to and perhaps people take notice, that's part of that process as well.
And I think when we were reflecting on that about learning, if we think about our role as governors, what we're doing with the learning that we're providing to pupils is giving them knowledge, skills and confidence, no matter what the topic or subject. And here we're just adding some of those skills would be around debating, discussing, being tolerant and being respectful, because these are, as are many other topics, they can be emotive and fuel passion, which is great, but schools and have been required for a long time, not just with regard to this subject, designed to help pupils through the opportunities they give them to be able to debate difficult subjects, but in a respectful way and with confidence and knowledge to back up what it is that they're saying. So this is all part of that existing agenda that is going on within schools across a range of other areas.
And I think this next slide is really just unpicking that in perhaps a little bit more detail. That says, well, the DfE the Department for Education have a position here, of course, and they're coming at it possibly a little bit defensively at the moment. And I don't say that in any kind of accusatory way. The bullet points on this slide here were given in answer to some investigative journalism from The Guardian a few months back now. But the backdrop of all of this is that back in 2013, the national curriculum was tweaked a little bit, and part of the tweaking was that the very specific reference that had previously existed to climate change was actually removed, and it was removed and replaced by a more general requirement on schools that they were teaching environmental change. Now, of course, that's open to a lot of interpretation, as most of our national curriculum is, to be honest. But it's interesting from a governance perspective. I mean, Linda and I would always be the first to say we are not expected to be curriculum experts in our school. But from a governance perspective, I think to ask the question, well, what does that look like in my school? How does that actually work? I think is a very valuable question to think about. And then you've got the following bullet points, really just articulating what the DfE's response is as to what that looks like at various stages. So the second bullet point is about primary schools, and there the expectation is that children are taught that human actions during our lives do actually have an impact and actually can change the environments in which we live. Again, quite how that's taught is that, but it is open to interpretation. Moving on into secondary, and this is probably predominantly Key Stage 3, this third bullet point here, within the science curriculum, young people have to learn about the production of carbon dioxide, not just in terms of our own respiratory systems, but also the other activity in terms of our demand for food, etc., and think about the impact that has on the world's climate. Moving on to GCSE, again in science, there's a further and probably a deeper consideration of the causes of climate change and the impact that humans actually have on those. And again, looking at the impact of CO2, carbon dioxide, and methane, and possible ways of actually reducing that, including looking at renewable energy. You've also got geography, and of course, geography in terms of some of the elements of human geography, as well as others, look at the causes and consequences of extreme weather conditions, etc., and how they're being impacted across the world. And then the DFE also pointed out that we have this new A-level that was introduced in 2017, where students can actually study environmental science at A-level. Now that does lead, I think, to one or two questions from for us as governors that we could possibly take back to our schools. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading all of them out to you here. You can see them on the slide in front of you. But that first one, well, if environmental change is the hook on which all of this is hung from the department's perspective, where does that actually see itself being manifested in our curriculum, in our schools, and in our trusts at this point in time? I think that's a very basic question, but I think it's one that, if as governors we're not sure of the answer, it's something that we should actually be perhaps contemplating asking. And again, the following questions actually relate to those last bullet points in terms of what's happening in our own schools. Whether you're a primary school or whether you're a secondary school, there are some questions which are digging a little bit deeper that are certainly worthy of asking, I would suggest. Now, we've got a question on the question panel from Max. That's their question. It's more of a comment, I guess. And Max is saying sustainability and environmental impact must be normalized and embedded in decision making in schools at senior level, for example, when planning purchases. I think that's a very sensible comment, Max. I think a lot of schools would probably challenge that that's not always easy. That's a luxury which comes with having the economic wherewithal to be able to do that. But I think, again, that's where governance can play a part. Are we asking those questions about when we are involved in procurement or purchasing of routine items in school? Are we thinking about environmental concerns? Are we thinking about ecology in any way, shape or form? And does that influence some of those decisions that are being made? But thank you for that, Max. And that brings us on, of course, to, just by way of a very short introduction there, to COP26 itself. Now, we all know it took place late October going into November. And of course, COP, as I said earlier, got an awful lot of media attention, not just here in the UK, but all over the world. It sparked a massive burst of activity on social media as well as mainstream media. And what it did do, of course, was actually leave a lot of children, young people asking questions. It saw emotions running high in certain quarters, of course. There were disappointment, there were tears at some stage, and desperation. But of course, what that does do is, sorry, that's a clumsy sentence, what that does, I should say, is leave us as governors possibly pondering on what should we expect our schools to be doing as a follow-up to COP26. And perhaps more pertinently, what should we be doing ourselves as governors? And so as we go through the rest of this session today, we're going to be exploring those points. So at this stage, I'm going to hand you over to Linda.
Thanks, Steve. And I think we need to just reference that we have a situation here where there is a lot of passion and a lot of energy, personal energy invested in wanting change to happen. And the reaction that we have in our schools needs to be both proportionate and appropriate. And given that backdrop that we've already talked about, that there is an appetite for change in the future. So as a response directly to COP26, the Education Secretary made a statement and released some information and setting out the vision that the DFE have for what happens next in response to those discussions at COP26, and stating that climate change was going to be embedded into what children learn, thinking about what the future might look like, but very much at a consultation stage at this particular point. And I think we need to reference that it's not the first time that schools and governors will be looking at this. It's not starting from a completely point of no action to date, and we'll share with you in a few moments some information that supports that. But let's have a look at what Nadeem Zawari said in his response, what the measures might include. And this is draft at this stage. It is consultative, and it has a number of platforms on which it is suggesting this is developed. So a model science curriculum, that is not to say, as Steve's already pointed out, that the science curriculum is not already covering this area, and we've got many examples of schools that have run successfully programs and pieces of curricula that fit around not only the science that we would already recognise, but this aspect of climate change, of environmental studies, and of supporting a more eco-friendly approach to the world. So building on from that new curricula, there is the sense of increasing the biodiversity of school grounds. Now, I'm sure some of you will be saying, yes, there are things that I can point to in my school where I can see that some of that is already taking place. The introduction of a virtual national education nature park, that's the idea that you would bring schools good practice together to look at what's happening in other areas, sharing that knowledge and increase, therefore, the biodiversity of the country in terms of mapping and support. The introduction, and this again is something that is a common platform approach by the DFE, introducing a new Climate Leaders Award. So thinking about the strategic approach that schools and academies might take. What might this look like? Well, we need to have it led by someone, some individuals, and then the incentivization here is around an award. And we'll talk a little bit more about awards in a moment in terms of some other pieces of work that are already going on. And then thinking about having a proper strategy for sustainability and climate change produced by April 2022. So those are the proposals. And so there is an appetite for change, and there is, this needs to be pegged back around capacity for change. So thinking about where is the capacity at the moment in our schools, and Steve talked about them being busy places. So this is set out in this draft strategy for that's just been published as a response, pinning it back to, whilst returning to some kind of normal educational experience for our young people. We're not back there yet to where we might want to be, because we've still got active pandemic approaches being enacted in our schools. So the immediate focus is rightly on enabling children to pick up on their learning and to be successful in their learning. But there is this backdrop saying the point of having a climate change convention was to make change possible, to drive change forward. And so the undertaking here is building back greener. So when we're thinking about how we are recovering from the pandemic, are there things that when we're looking at them, we can do in a better, more climate friendly and sustainable way? And there are 4 strands that form this. And you'll see that the proposals, the response from the DFE is picking up on these strands. So education, that's the curriculum, thinking about how we look at green jobs and green skills. What have we learned from a more climate friendly approach to working from home? Are there other things that we can do in terms of the work market that can fuel that? Learning from and connecting with nature. I'll go on to say a little bit more about that in a moment, and how we make our buildings more sustainable and eco-friendly. And again, that picks up the question or comment that was made just a few moments ago.
And I think, Linda, it's worth saying here that the DfE are saying that they're actually going to be consulting on this over the next 6 months. Well, we're a month into that already. Nothing's happened that we're aware of in the public domain yet, although it might be going on behind the scenes. But they're saying they're going to consult and build and develop this strategy, collaborating with children, young people, educators, i.e. hopefully that means teachers in schools, as well as sustainability experts and environmentalists before final publication. Now, I think there's some fairly lofty aims in here, and I think my take on this is that, this is something that is a little bit thought-provoking. There's no doubt about that, this particular document, I mean. But actually, what happens in our schools is very much driven at local level. The government can set the climate under which we operate. Sorry, that pun unintended there. But there's a lot of comments coming through on the question panel at the moment, where people are rightly suggesting that this is more than just the taught curriculum. And I think it's important to understand, folks, that when we say the curriculum, when Linda mentions the curriculum, we're not just talking about the elements of a national curriculum that we mentioned on that slide at the beginning. We're talking about everything that underpins what children and young people learn and are exposed to at school, which includes their mental health and well-being, which includes personal, social and health education, and all other elements that bring together that idea that environmental sustainability going forward, and the idea that there is a need to save our planet at the moment, has to be part of that. And that is about encouraging dialogue. It is about encouraging participation.
And I think this might give the false impression that schools have not visited this topic ever before, and that would be very wrong. This is something that has been embedded in a number of resources and actions that schools have taken for a very long time. I remember doing a Governor Mark Award probably about 12 years ago, and the Governor project that the young people in this school had put in place, governors gave a small amount of money to student projects. So the students put forward projects that they would like to do. The governors funded one of those projects, and then the pupils reported back how that project had been successful. So this is building on pupil voice, but 12 years ago, this project was about reducing food waste in the school hall, the amount of food that was being thrown away. And it had two elements. There was one about reducing the amount of food children put on their plate or brought into school from their packed lunch, and then about what happened to the food that was actually then being tipped into the bins. So this isn't a new idea. There has been passion and a drive by schools and by governing boards to support some elements of this in the past. And I think it's worth looking at what's already going on, which organisations have been involved in this, some of them for many years, and the opportunities and the resources that have already been flowing into schools and the projects that schools have done, either from completely from their own point of view, thinking of that mental health aspect particularly. But let's have a look at some of those. The first of these is the World Wildlife Fund, and they've been working on these projects for as long as I can remember, and a lot of the research that they do, a lot of the resources that they produce are available, and schools have made very good use for those, and these are based around those science aspects and apply to all age ranges of children, and of the kind of work that they do to get their message out and to support real change through a whole variety of platforms for not only children but for adults as well. And they excuse me, they publish information about the things that they've been successful. So this is all about having resources that are well researched and come from credible sources to support children's learning. Now, we don't make decisions about that as governors. That is for schools to make those decisions about which resources support which elements of the curriculum. But there are a whole range of things that are available free of charge. There's no cost to any of these that allow schools to pick up and work with a variety of different climate change aspects and understanding. So that's just one organisation that is working to produce resources from a well-researched point of view. The second organisation that's worth mentioning is the British Council. Now, they've been operating again for a very long time. They funded visits to different countries for teachers and heads to look at different ways of things that were working around the world. I've been involved in a couple of those myself in the past, but it's an international organisation. It thinks about how we connect the world, because it's not just the actions that we take in our own country that are important, but you can see here there are a range of resources to use, including podcasts and online resources, and again, challenge for actions and projects that pupils and schools can get involved in as they wish to. Again, this is very much thinking about how do students start taking some of this forward themselves. And then if we look at UNESCO, they also they contribute to the United Nations 2030 framework. Again, this is about connecting communities across the world with that understanding that it is a world that belongs to all of us. So therefore we need to have cooperative approaches and understanding. There's a focus here on learning. Again, a range of resources. And I think importantly, we're seeing the voice of our young people come through very strongly as a result of a whole range of things that have been happening over the last couple of years. And this is a commitment here to empower children and young people, because the future will be in their hands. So a well-informed, knowledgeable, confident group of young people coming forward to make key decisions and take this agenda forward is really important. So there's a whole range of resources. What have schools done so far? Because, as I said, we're not starting from a starting point that is ground level. So there is an interest and a commitment here. And some schools have been doing a lot of things for a large number of years before the current pupils were actually attending those schools. This work has set foundations and has become embedded in the way in which schools work. So one thing that is clear is that lots of things are happening on the ground. We've got a large number of schools that have their own school gardens that engage children with growing things, tasting things, being aware of how things grow, where our food comes from, and even taking some of their skills and knowledge into competitive arenas. So there are a whole range of schools that have school gardens, some tiny, some much larger. There are lots of schools that focus on more outdoor learning, and this was happening before the pandemic made us think about this as an option for controlling infection. But the opportunity for children to be outside, to undertake some of their normal learning in an environment that was not inside the classroom. Again, a lot of schools have had a focus on this for a number of years. You can see this particular example, they've provided an opportunity for that to happen in weather that isn't always sunny and dry in the UK. So lots of opportunities outside classroom, enhancing maths and science. And Steve was presenting a webinar with me the other day and was talking about an opportunity for a maths lesson that he'd been roped in to help with his wife, who is a teacher. So this is happening now, and there are more opportunities for that to happen in the future. Certainly the school where I'm chair of governors, we're looking at how we can do more things outside as often as possible, not just in the summer.
Linda, I think it's probably just worth mentioning there. I mean, we've chosen some very nice leafy green areas. We are very aware that not all schools are as fortunate as others, but we have seen a groundswell, particularly in a lot of the inner London schools that don't have school fields, etc., being able to think about adapting their ground. So gardening clubs, for example, lots of schools now are having raised beds actually put onto areas of the playground, so that a lot of these things are still happening. And yes, it's lovely to have a school field and a beautiful structure like this as an outside classroom, but actually you can do lots of things that actually run in parallel to all of these suggestions that we're looking at here, in a whole variety of different schools. We may have chosen some rather lovely photographs, but that doesn't mean these projects aren't accessible to all.
And I think we move on to Forest Schools, which is a programme that has again gained a huge amount of success through the pandemic. The children enjoy being outside, enjoy learning outside. There are opportunities to create little areas, even with container growing, even with in some of the less leafy areas and more and smaller sites. And there'll be some of you that will govern in old Victorian schools with very small sites, but it is possible to introduce elements of this on a smaller scale and get children involved in developing skills that they wouldn't normally have had access to in schools in the past, more and using the skills of the outdoor world more than the tools of an inside classroom. They're very popular. They're growing in popularity, where we saw them possibly delivered as a Forest School opportunity in one year group in primary. There are a lot of schools that are now extending that Forest School programme because it is successful and it does engage children in social and team building activities, as well as in learning. And so these are becoming more commonplace across more year groups in more schools. The idea of having a more biodiverse area, and this does not have to be this kind of scale. It can be container pots, it can be a small pond in a container in a section of the school grounds that has been designed to meet the Forest School needs, as well as some environmental study. It can even be a small corner of a classroom where pupils are being encouraged to plant beans and see how they grow. So it's scale, opportunity, context is everything here. But again, teaching children about food, seeing how things grow, sending children home with little beans in pots that they've planted. It just engages children with nature. So schools are doing lots of these things in their own ways.
Sorry to interrupt just there, Linda, but there's a comment on the question panel at the moment from Anna. Anna's saying that she's not worried about the curriculum or the school garden. She believes her school have actually got that covered, even though obviously they're busy in a sort of a COVID capacity at the moment. Anna's saying it's the resources to help the business manager assess, for example, energy suppliers, are they green, how to measure CO2 in the buildings and then go about reducing it, etc., or how caterers improve sustainability of food. I think all of those are, I'm not saying that they're lofty ambitions, Anna. I think they are bigger projects. And I think our message today is that, things can start small in school, but there are opportunities that governors can get involved in, and the governors can perhaps be the ones who actually introduce the idea back into their schools, where bigger projects are actually on the horizon. So I think it's a lot easier to think about those bigger schemes when you're renegotiating a catering contract, for example. If you have got some building work going on in the school, that's where governors can get involved, I think, at the appropriate stage. Say, well, hang on a minute, what are the environmental credentials of the suppliers that we're engaging with? Are we allowing our children, our students, to actually have a voice here? Just a very quick example. Secondary school where I'm chair of governors, we're a standalone academy, we're a 2,000 pupil school. Our catering contract is quite a worthwhile one. It was let again recently. Part of the tendering process was to involve student panels, and our sixth formers particularly got involved and said that one of the conditions they wanted in the contract was that the caterer had to make a commitment towards local sourcing of food. And I think that's the kind of thing that is about empowering young people, it's about engaging young people, but it's actually about giving the school some better environmental credentials, for want of a better word.
And I think we do need to see an increase in the amount of suppliers that are having a green agenda, and this will take place over time. So we may not always have the choice we might want to make, but moving it in that direction, I think there is an appetite for change in doing some of these things in a more sustainable way, because there is a limited resource. So just to finish off this little montage of what schools are actually doing at the moment, recycling projects are active in lots of schools, how children get to school, encouraging children to walk to school, to cycle to school, and there are often initiatives around well-being, and this one is showing a walk to school week that happened in October. So there are lots of things that schools are doing. We may not always, as governors, be aware of what's actually happening in our school, even if we're getting the school's newsletter. So it is worth thinking about. The Eco Schools is an interesting one, because this organisation has been going for over 25 years. It has had its roots in the Keep Britain Tidy. It is the charity that runs it is active in many countries and introduced the blue badge for beaches and things like that. So this is a very successful and well recognised organisation, working with around 56,000 schools around the world. But they have, and many schools have engaged in their Eco Schools Award, and they have, again, active resources that are available to schools, and many schools have achieved their Green Flag Award and are active in that area, and has driven some of those projects that I've already mentioned. So there is much that is happening. There is much that that we see in our schools, and at this point I'm going to hand back to Steve. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we can do as a governing board.
Thanks, Linda. And again, this all has to be set in not just the current context, but the context of everything that Linda's just gone through in terms of what's already there. But in terms of what proactively as governors we can perhaps think about, firstly, is asking questions. Now, one of the things that we like to try and do in the webinars that we produce, including the number that we've done for Governors for Schools, is always suggest the sort of questions that governors might want to take back to their boards with them. But asking questions generally and specifically around this whole area of climate change, environmental sustainability, etc., they're valuable. And again, not just as a discrete subject, but again, we've had a lot of questions on the panel, the Q&A panel already, that relate to, if you like, the business of the school. So the school business managers arena, there's a lot of sustainability issues that can come in there. And when we're talking about contracts, purchases, any other areas of procurement, etc., for governors to actually bring in the idea of sustainability there, I think is a very worthwhile thing to do, as well, of course, when we're talking about the curriculum and pupils learning and actually empowering youngsters to get involved. One of the things that perhaps we might want to think about doing is actually suggesting a climate change provision audit. I don't mean now, I don't mean in the run up to Christmas, I don't mean whilst we've still got schools struggling to put teachers in front of all classes at the moment because of local upsurges in the infection rate related to COVID, but at a time in the not too distant future, how about we do that and actually just reckon, because very often an audit brings to light a lot of things that are causes for celebration, a lot of things that we're doing in our schools that we don't already know about. Linda and I were talking about this yesterday, and one of the things that just sprang to my mind and when we were having the conversation is, I'm also chair of governors at a Key Stage 1 and early years school, and children there they're part of the free fruit and vegetable scheme for Key Stage 1 children, and children get their carrots or their tomatoes or their apples or pears or whatever every day. Each classroom now has a green food recycling bin, and we also run a school garden, and there's a class monitor every day gets the job of taking the bin with all the apple cores or the carrot tops or whatever it might be down and putting them in the compost bin. Now, we don't do that because we're a school that's ultra green and concerned with climate change. But actually, were we to do an audit, that's one of the things that we could actually then say to children, this is why we do this. We do it because it's part of our tidy school and we don't like to waste things at the moment. But actually allowing children, even at Key Stage 1, to appreciate the bigger picture that fits into is a really important element, I would suggest. So, and we're going to come on and talk about a resource that perhaps does go some way to fulfilling that audit in just a few moments. We should, of course, be asking if our schools are accessing the very, very extensive range of free resources that are out there at the moment. Linda's highlighted a couple of the ones that we're particularly impressed with, and I think the Worldwide Fund for Nature, because it's a British charity, it's got with our school system, our educational framework in mind, there are some hugely valuable resources there that schools can actually tap into. And of course, social media has a lot of very generous educationalists actually participating in it who are very happy to share resources. So we should be asking that question. And above all else, of course, the best question ever that governors can ask is, what else could we do? What more could we do to have our children understand the importance of, without wishing to be too pejorative, is saving our planet? What more can we do to address climate change, as well as bringing that into the business side of our schools? So there's some very important elements that do need to be brought into the routine discussions in governing board meetings here.
John has made a comment about working with other boards or within a multi-academy trust to put pressure on energy efficiency and sustainability, and those projects have always existed within a trust. Yes, raise your concerns, absolutely, work together. That's absolutely down to good governance. And if you're in a maintained school, asking what your local authority is doing around procurement, and that's absolutely right to do that as well. So I think those are things that you can rightly ask. A lot of this is about finding out what's already in place, finding out what is possible at the moment, and asking for change in the future. So those are all, they are all, as long as they're rooted in the strategic, they are all appropriate activities.
And as Linda's saying that, I'm just thinking, going back probably 10, even 15 years now. I've been a governor for a very long time, but I was doing some governor training, and there was a program at the time. And again, this goes back to probably the early parts of this century, when schools were very much being encouraged to think about sustainability. And there was a great video that was circulating at the time called "Save the World 5 Minutes at a Time." It was produced in Australia, but it was all about how children were being engaged in this whole idea of local grown foods, saving litter, recycling, all of those elements that now suddenly are becoming flavour of the month again. None of these things are new, and I think all of them do have their place. And like I said, we've also got a comment on the panel from Alan, who's talking about mitigating risk, including financial and operational. All of those things are actually important, but of course, whatever the driver is, whether we're actually thinking about ecology and recycling because it's a way of actually saving money, I don't think that matters. What we need to make sure is that as governors, we know what the rationale is, but actually we are sharing that idea with children and young people that we are, as a school, doing our bit. We are, as a trust, doing our bit, and we are trying to do more, and we're looking at it, and we want to talk to you about it. Those are the important elements here. Okay, I mentioned a few moments ago that there is this other resource that is out there at the moment, the National Governance Association, in league with the I'm sorry, I'm trying to, I can't remember the name of the organisation, the National Association for Environmental Education, apologies. So the NGA are in cooperation with the National Association for Environmental Education right now, and they have produced this resource. It's not behind the NGA's paywall, which a lot of their resources are, so this is freely available to everybody. And what they've done is taken the NAEE resource, which is basically 26 questions that governors in their boards can ask, and they're equally applicable in academy trust situations as they are in maintained schools, I would suggest. And on the next slide, I've just given you an example of some of those questions, the way that they're posed within the document. This particular one looking at the curriculum, which of course is an area of focus in all of our schools at the moment, not least of all because Ofsted are focusing on that as far as the inspection framework is concerned. But this is looking at the curriculum, and obviously the curriculum as well as the way in which it's taught, and hopefully the way in which children's learning progresses as a consequence of that. So all of the questions are posed or constructed from the perspective of, to what extent does the school, does your school, but obviously we'll personalise it to our own. So for me, I think it's quite nice. There's a way here that we can actually extend our questions. I don't want to go into this in any great detail, but just to point out to you that the resource is there. As with all the resources that we've actually showcased on this webinar today, we're actually putting the URLs for all of them on the penultimate slide, so that you can follow them up if you'd like to. But I think for me, what this does, then, well, okay, we've got some questions here, but what does that lead to in terms of action? And you may have heard Linda and I say this before. The best question from a governor always is the so what question, not just so what, but so what with something else tagged onto the end of it. So, you know, so what do we do about this as a customer, as a governor rather, in our school, making sure that this becomes custom and practice? So the first one, you know, recognizing the statutory curriculum and etc., providing opportunities for interpretation. So in other words, how are we taking that forward? So what way do we foster curiosity amongst our children and young people in our schools, and give them to perhaps give them that opportunity to explore in a broader way what sustainability, what climate change, what saving the planet actually means? So again, the idea that we offered earlier about doing an audit in our schools, or setting up an audit in our schools, again, it's not for us as governors to do it, but suggesting an audit so that we actually explore, well, where does this fit into the curriculum? It's not just about science and geography. A couple of people have made comments about STEM subjects. All of those are areas where we can actually think about where sustainability, where climate change can come into the discussion. All of your schools will undoubtedly have, be it circle time, be it PSHE, which is personal, social and health education, or perhaps tutor group time in secondary schools, where there are those opportunities for discussion and debate. I know that certainly the secondary school where I'm chair, we've not been having assemblies recently because of a spike in COVID rates, but we always have in tutor group time, first thing in the morning, thought for the day, and that's a discussion opportunity. And during COP26, I meant to say, those thoughts for the day were all around those issues, and that was an opportunity. Now, at secondary level, debating societies, all of those things that Linda's already talked about in terms of enrichment and extracurricular activities, they are opportunities for children and young people to actually get involved, to develop that broader thinking here. So I think for me, this resource is actually a really good start, but it's not the end piece. The finished piece is to say, okay, what are we already doing? But what more could we do here? And I think that's where the really interesting questions begin to hopefully engender some very interesting answers as well. So in terms of questions that as governors we perhaps ought to be thinking about asking ourselves here back in our schools, and these are things to really reflect upon rather than to necessarily give you a definitive list. But as a school, as a trust at the moment, do you know that the organisation where you're a governor does enough with its pupils to enable them to actually understand and engage? And again, that would be in an age appropriate way, of course, in not just for debate, because this isn't just about a debate about climate, but some positive actions that make a difference to the issue of climate change. I think the underlying thought agreement that came out of COP26 was the time for talking is maybe past now. What we need to do now is engage in action. What we need to do is persuade our children, the next generation of children and the generation beyond them, that we have actually done something about this. So
I think there is an important point that was made on the in the question and answers just a few moments ago, that this is a responsibility that we're not just passing on to our young people by providing a good curriculum. This is a responsibility that we all share. So what is it that we can do as governors? Again, proportionate and appropriate. And Jess has made an important comment, or it's a question actually. How can we support schools in prioritising some of these activities, which naturally, not all of them, come with a cost? Climate audit and efficient options when resources are already tight and decisions are naturally made on a predominantly monetary basis. So I think for me, there is definitely that. There's free resources. What is that? What are our schools choosing professionally? Because if there are a lot of free resources and they're credible, we should be saying as governors, value for money suggests that they should be using some of those resources before thinking about buying in resources. But also then in those kind of conversations, the financial ones that Steve mentioned, the way in which we are looking strategically at reports about our school environment, including what happens on our premises, be it wide or small. We are making decisions. We are improving the quality of pupil voice. They don't all come at a cost. Some of it is about prioritising a little bit of time to understand, well, what have we got in place? The audit doesn't have to be a paid for costly thing. It can be something that there is a collaboration between students and staff and reported to governors. So there are ways of doing some of this in that proportionate and appropriate way that don't engage schools in huge amounts of financial outlay.
I think that's a really important point. And again, I'm just picking up another comment from Chris on the panel here. Chris is actually talking about a discussion in his school recently where Ofsted actually dismissed the early years Leeds idea of introducing forest school provision and access to allotments. Now, I think that's very short-sighted, unfortunately, of that particular Ofsted inspector, and I think maybe we're a way off getting Ofsted to recognise some of the reasons that we do what we do in our schools. But if a broad and balanced curriculum is part of where we're supposed to be in our schools at the moment, all of those things are vital in my view. And again, just picking up on Linda's point of cost, for a lot of these initiatives, just some of the big ticket items that we've talked about in terms of energy costs, again, more sustainable, they have a price tag attached to them. But instituting a school garden or instituting a forest school may need a little bit of training, but very often, a lot of those things you can actually rely on the only cost being the time of individuals to actually do them. I don't wish to blow my own trumpet here, but whenever I can, give up my Friday afternoons to go to the local infant school where I'm chair of governors and run a garden club for year 2. A lot of those things that we do in our garden, we go to local garden centres and we beg. I'm not ashamed to say that. They are incredibly generous. They give us all of their old seed potatoes when they can't sell them anymore. We plant them. We have a later potato crop than anybody else does. And similarly for lots of other things. We had a local company give us water butts last year. And that led to a whole load of learning for our children in terms of why it's important to harvest rainwater as opposed to having to pay for it when it comes out of a metered provision. And again, all of those things can be done, whatever your circumstances, wherever you're located at the school. If you can find people, and there's been some lovely programs on TV recently about town centre and city centre, urban allotments, urban farms, etc. Those are great idea generators, and they're things that you can engage pupils in the thinking of, and don't always have a significant cost attached to them. And that leads into the next bullet point, really, which is about planning, to do more. What more can we do? And what does that provide in terms of giving breadth and giving balance to our school curriculum? All of us have an eye over our shoulders, I guess, at the moment to when Ofsted might be coming next time. Linda and I are very passionate about saying that we don't do what we do for Ofsted, we do what we do for our children, and we hope that Ofsted will actually recognise the value in that when they come, notwithstanding Chris's comment there a few moments ago. But actually giving our children a motivating and exciting curriculum that enables them to learn new skills, to develop knowledge, and also know and have the confidence that they're making a commitment to climate change reduction, is a tangible thing. That's something that brings real value to our schools. And of course, above all else, we should all reflect on, is there more that we could do? And the more that we could do for many of you, notwithstanding that all of your schools may well be involved in doing a lot of those things that Linda showcased in that little montage of slides, but the more for a lot of us will be about making sure that we think about sustainability and the contribution it makes to climate change when we are talking about procurement, when we are talking about tendering in our school. And the business management of schools, very often in the last 10 years, the mentality has been, let's go for the cheapest option. Now, the value for money option isn't the cheapest always. In fact, invariably, it's not. The value for money option is the one that perhaps delivers sustainability for our planet over the longer term. And those are some of the questions that perhaps we should be thinking about as governors, some of the things that perhaps we should be lobbying on as we go forward. And that, sorry, I've got two screens in front of me and I pressed the wrong mouse then, I do apologise. Doing nothing isn't an option. Now, that's a phrase that's been used very often in the last 12 months or so, particularly in the month of the COP conference. But it's a serious point. It really isn't. We've got to the stage now where the option to do absolutely nothing at all doesn't exist, because if we don't, we know what the consequences are going to be. And forgive me, this isn't intended to be a political slight at all. I am personally, I'm a great lover of quotations, and I found this one quite some time ago, and today seemed a good opportunity to give it an airing. Don't need to say who it is. Hopefully everybody recognises the speaker here, but Barack Obama's famous one-liner: "We're the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it." For me, that's a very powerful sentence to actually take back to our schools. And I think all of us owe it to ourselves, but we owe it to our children, the next generation of children, to do something about it. And the first step of that might just be about asking questions. But whatever we do, please, folks, do something about it at the appropriate time, of course. Talking of questions, that's all that Linda and I wanted to actually share with you from our perspective this morning. But if you have any more questions, and thank you sincerely for all the questions that have come on the panel already this morning. Linda, are there any particular ones that you think we should address at this stage? I know you've been scanning through them.
There's a couple that I've just pinged in very quickly. So Graham has made a point about sometimes the cheapest things aren't the best things. I'm paraphrasing this for the sake of time. But I think the message here is about cost effective over the lifetime of the particular project is what he's talking about. And you know, the greenest energy is not the one that is the one that is not often used. So when we are thinking about reletting contracts, as you said, we need to think about what is it that our schools are doing. Have they included a question that says, and have we considered the sustainability and environmental impact? Is that part of the way in which decision making is informed by this? I think that's an important point. In Marie's making a point about it's not just about the curriculum, but it is about a whole school environment. That's about culture, and I think that it is, if we have not made that point that it is a responsibility of us all, then I think I would want to just think about that. And if our strategy at some time in the future includes something about our individual schools' approach to climate change, including a policy, if that's something that you feel passionately about. Again, those are all things, there is no one way to do this. We do it proportionately and responsibly with what we have in our schools. And as long as we're moving forward, it doesn't all have to be done today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, for those questions, everybody. And again, I think just a final word from us. This is, as Linda said, about a proportionate approach. What we wanted to do today was hopefully provoke a little bit of thought on your part. It would appear from all the comments that we've done that. So thank you very much for participating in the session today. As I did mention, we've given you the URLs for all of the various documents and organisations that we've referred to this morning. And just remains for us to say, and I think I've got about 30 seconds left to say it, thank you very much indeed for joining us for this session today. If we haven't answered all the questions, what we would normally do is actually just go through the question panel again, and we'll get back to you individually. But I hope you'll appreciate, with so many people on the webinar today, it's difficult to answer every question individually and acknowledge you by name. But if we haven't done that, I hope you do feel that we have actually responded generally to your question, if not specifically. So all that remains to say is thank you very much once again. We look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in the new year, when we're going to be providing some more webinars for governors for schools. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day today. Have a very nice Christmas and Happy New Year. And above all else, stay safe. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.